Top of the morning to ya, my fellow myth and fantasy nerds. My name is Tanner, and I'd like to welcome ya back to my YouTube channel. And a very happy St. Paddy's Day to ya, me laddies, me lassies, and everyone in between. Okay, I'm gonna stop with the accent now. Anyway, for this year's St. Patrick's Day special, I wanted to tell you guys an ancient myth from Celtic mythology, as I've already done the story of the actual St. Patrick last year. Now, specifically, I wanted to tell the Celtic creation story, at least the version that I've heard, as well as the subsequent battle for control over all of Ireland. As with all my other myth and legend retellings, linked to the playlist up in the cards and in the description down below, I will be keeping this story as close to the original as I can, while adding in some of my own creative license when and where it's needed. Also, as a reminder to you all, this story, as with many others, has various different versions and retellings, and this is merely one of them. So as always, please make sure to leave a like on this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe down below. Pretty please! It'll help me make more content for you. And without further ado, here is the Isle of Destiny. In the beginning, there was nothing. Nothing but the primordial river Danu. However, eventually, some of the primordial mist coalesced and formed the earth. The Danu's waters flowed over the land, and from that land full of potential sprang the first oak tree. From that great oak tree, two acorns fell, and as soon as they hit the ground, the first gods sprang from them. One became the Dagda, god of magic, strength, and fertility, among other things, and the other became the Morrigan, goddess of crows, death, war, and sovereignty, among other things. These two gods, the first children of the Danu, soon became parents, and then grandparents, and soon enough their descendants, who would come to be known as the Tuatha which loosely translates to children of the Danu, became numerous enough to found four great cities along the banks of the primordial river. In each of these cities, a very powerful and magical artifact was created. In one city there sat the Stone of Destiny, an enchanted stone which would release a cry of glee when a pure and noble monarch placed their foot upon it, or sat down on it. Sources disagree. In the second city, there was the great sword Retaliator, which shone as bright as the sun, and when it was unsheathed, no opponent could resist it. The third city held the red javelin, which, when it was thrown and its master spoke the command, it would never, ever miss the target its master determined. Also, when the master spoke a different command, the javelin would immediately return to their hand. Finally, the fourth city held the Cauldron of Plenty, a cooking pot which could never, ever be emptied. One day the Dagda gathered his descendants and told them, "I have seen the destiny of our people, and it is not here on the banks of the Danube. Our people must follow where the sun sets, and there will be an island, which we shall call Inishfail, the Isle of Destiny. It is there where our people will flourish." Before they left, the Morrigan gave her descendants a word of caution. Our people will not be the only ones to lay claim to Inishfael. There will be others who seek to settle there. With this warning and fortune, the Tuatha De Danann took their sacred treasures and set across the sea to reach the isle that was destined to be their new home. Some say that they came in a dark cloud from a place left nameless and landed on top of a mountain. Others say they came from exotic lands and cities far across the ocean, where they practiced both the arts of science and magic, and who burned their ships as soon as they landed, hedging their bets on conquering Inishfael in the name of the Tuatha De Danann. One thing we know for certain, though, as they traveled and scouted their new home, sure enough, as the Morrigan warned, they found they were not alone. A strange group of people were already living on their island, and the Tuatha De Danann approached and tried to strike a deal. These people, known as the Fir Bolg, listened to the Tuatha De Danann's request to divide Inishfael equally between them, so both of their peoples could live in peace. Unfortunately, the Firbolg could not be persuaded, and so battle lines were drawn. However, before we move on, I'd like to explain the rules of this battle, as they are very different from what we know today. In order to fight with honor, the Tuatha De Danann crafted spears for the Firbolg, and the Firbolg crafted spears for the Tuatha De Danann, and each side agreed to three things: where the battlegrounds would be, how long the battle could go on, and even how many soldiers each side was allowed to bring. Soon enough, both sides met up at the high pass of Balgatan, outfitted with armor and weapons fit for great warriors. Both sides of the battle were evenly matched. When one tried to overtake the other would beat them back. This was how the battle raged, like a pendulum swinging back and forth between both sides. Eventually, the leaders on each side of the battle fought in single combat. On one side there was Nuada, the leader of the Tuatha De Danann. On the other there was Shreng, leader of the Firbolg. Their soldiers on either side took a step back, giving their leaders enough room for the battle. Nuada and Shreng's blades glittered brightly in the sun, moving quicker than any had seen before. The opponent's blades clanged and clashed against each other, until Shreng saw his chance and brought his sword down hard. So powerful was this blow, the sword sliced Nuada's shield in half, and Nuada found himself, figuratively and literally, disarmed. When Nuada fell, blood spilling on the ground, the Dagda stepped in and took him to visit Dian Cecht, god of healing and medicine. Dian Cecht, using all his medical know-how, created a new arm for Nuada, one out of the purest silver, which worked just as well as an arm of flesh and blood. This new arm was what gave Nuada his epithet, Nuada Ergetlam, meaning Nuada of the silver hand. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, one might think that seeing their leader fall at the hands of the enemy would have caused the Tuatha De Danann to surrender, but this would not be the case. Resh, one of the greatest warriors of the Tuatha De Danann, quick-witted and handsome-faced, took the severed arm of Nuada and raised it high. Outraged at the sight of their fallen leader, the Tuatha De Danann swore an oath of vengeance upon the Firbolg. Using that oath as a battle cry, the Tuatha De Danann ran through the army of the Firbolg like a hurricane. It was a massacre. and the place where the Firbolg set up camp would be known from then on as the Fort of Pax, because of the wild dog packs who would feast on the bodies of the dead. The Firbolg were all but defeated. Shrang took the remaining 300 warriors to council, where they sought to stand and fight to the bitter end. Shrang met Nuada on the battlefield once again. However, this new battle was deemed unfair, as Nuada had his arm cut off and replaced by one of silver. Instead, the Tuatha De Danann were so impressed by the Firbolg that they would stand and fight to the end. They offered the Firbolg any province in Ireland to call their home. The Firbolg would take Connacht as their home, and it is said that their descendants still live there to this day. At last, the battle was over, and the Tuatha De Danann celebrated a glorious victory. Unfortunately, they had one last problem to settle. Who would be their king? Nuada could no longer be their king, as he had had his arm cut off, and, according to ancient tradition, only a man whose body was still whole could be king. Therefore, handsome Bresh was chosen to be their new ruler, due to his bravery in battle and his charming personality. However, this choice would soon have dire consequences, for you see Bresh was half Fomorian. In his rule, he acted more akin to his Fomorian side than his Tuatha De Danann side, and Ireland fell into disarray. Now, you might be wondering who or what are the Fomorians? Well, the Fomorians were a lineage of creatures said to be older than even the Tuatha De Danann. They were a lineage known for both their powerful magical ability and their bizarre forms. Because Bresh was half Fomorian, his coronation brought the Tuatha De Danann hope at a potential alliance with the Fomorians. Unfortunately for them, the only things the Fomorians were interested in was having the Tuatha De Danann and the Firbolg serve them. Bresh's Fomorian father imposed such tithes upon the Tuatha De Danann that not a single home in Ireland was left untaxed. Even the greatest members of the Tuatha De Danann were made to work for the Fomorians. Ogma, god of learning, speech, and language, was forced to carry firewood, and the Dagda himself was ordered to dig ditches. The great lords started mumbling and complaining amongst themselves, and the great poets and musicians began mocking Bresh. Soon the Tuatha De Danann started a revolt. Bresh was not happy that the Tuatha De Danann took the throne away from him, so he ran to his father and asked him for help. Bresh's father told him to talk to Balor of the Evil Eye. Balor was a giant, the leader of the Fomorians, and one of his main features was the singular eye in the middle of his forehead. It was this eye, the lid so heavy it took a pulley system and multiple smaller Fomorians to even open it, where Balor got his evil power. Bresh talked to Balor, who agreed to fight by his side and put him back on the throne. Meanwhile, Dian Cech's son, Miach, came to Nuada and told him, "I think I found a way to bring your old arm back." So Miach slaved on the operating table for 9 days, until he finished crafting an arm of flesh, blood, and bone for Nuada to use. However, when Dian Cecht heard what his son did, he thought this deed was an abomination, although he may have just been jealous of his son's skills. So Dian Cecht took his sword and cut a gash in Miach's head. However, So great was Miach's skill, he was able to immediately heal himself. His father struck again, and soon cut into his skull. However, Miach was able to mend that injury as well. On and on this went, Dian Kech swinging his sword into Miach's head, and Miach healing himself of these grievous injuries. However, with one final blow, Dian Kech sliced his son's head in half, and this was the one injury that Miach couldn't heal from. Despite this, the deed had already been done, and Nuada had a brand new arm. As he was whole again, he could now lead the Tuatha De Danann and the Firbolg into battle against the Fomorians. Nuada led his people against their Fomorian overlords, and they met in the Field of Towers on Samhain night. The great towers sat, watching both sides prepare their soldiers for the upcoming battle. As dawn broke over the horizon, the two enemies, the Tuatha De Danann and Firbolg on one side, and the Fomorians on the other, charged towards each other with thunderous war cries. Spears broke shields and pierced flesh, swords clanged against each other, and weapons clanged and broke against armor. The battle went on for days and days. However, the Fomorians noticed something strange happening. While their weapons grew dull or broke in half, while their people fell in battle, the opposing army, the Tuatha De Danann and the Firbolg, could send wave after wave of new healthy warriors who would be brandishing weapons that seemed to be just cooled from the forge. The Fomorians grew suspicious, so they sent a spy into the enemy camp. The spy, like Bresh, was half Fomorian, half Tuatha De Danann, and therefore could easily pass as the enemy. As the spy moved among the enemy, he saw to his sheer astonishment 3 blacksmiths, tall as towers and strong as oxen. These smiths could magically fix the weapons of the Tuatha De Danann with just one strike from their hammers. He also saw a great spring glittering with the clearest water. As he watched, one of the soldiers took his comrade, who was grievously injured, to the spring and placed him in. As soon as the fallen soldier touched the water, he sprang back out as healthy and lively as before. The spy moved to one of the 3 smiths and said to him, "My spear broke in battle. Can you fix it for me?" When the smith obliged, the spy took the spear, rammed it into the chest of the first smith, then hurled it into the chest of another. Now weaponless, he ran and told the Fomorians about the 3 smiths and the healing spring. Balor told his people to take stones and plug up the healing spring, and they did so, but not before the Tuatha De Danann could heal one of the smiths. Now that the spring was plugged up, the battle really began. The leaders of each side led their people onto the battlefield, and were majestic to behold. Nuada Ergetlam in shining silver armor on one side, Balor looming over the battlefield on the other, his eyes still hidden behind its heavy lid. The Dagda could be seen wielding his massive club, massive enough to strike 9 men down in one blow. The Tuatha De Danann's musicians and bards sang battle songs, their druids called down thunder and lightning, the sorceresses used their powers to drain the Fomorians of their energy, and even the Cailleach Fira, the great hag, goddess of mountains and winter, among other things, called the rocks and trees to their aid. The two armies battled like nothing seen before or since. Once again, in the middle of the battlefield, the leaders of the two armies, Nuda and Balor, stood against each other. Balor charged at Nuada, eyes still closed tightly, and Nuada stood bravely against him. Though Nuada was a great warrior in his own right, unfortunately, Balor was able to overwhelm and overtake him. However, even as Nuada lay dying, another great warrior, Lu, master of all arts and sciences, including the art of war itself, stepped towards Balor and challenged him to single combat. "Lift my lid," Balor told the smaller Fomorians perched on his shoulders, "so that I can finally see my opponent." The smaller Fomorians started cranking at the pulley system attached to Balor's head, and the giant hook that pierced the heavy lid pulled it open. As the lid started lifting, the warriors standing close by started feeling queasy. As it reached the halfway point, even the warriors with the strongest stomachs felt like throwing up. Finally, as the fully opened eye stared down at the battlefield, any and all who were caught in its gaze were instantly engulfed in flames. Lu wasn't deterred, though, as there was a prophecy that Balor would be defeated by his grandson, and as Lu was the son of Balor's daughter, he definitely fit the profile. Lu took his swing, swung it around and around as hard as he could, and fired. Such force the rock had, such power behind it, and such accuracy of the throw, that the stone tore right through Balor's eye and flung it out the back of his head. The eye smashed into the Fomorian side of the battlefield, where all Fomorians who looked into the eye found themselves set alight. The remaining Fomorians started trembling. They knew their defeat was at hand. At that very moment, the Morrigan flew over the battlefield on wings as dark as the night sky, and released a battle cry that filled her descendants, the Tuatha De Danann, with bloodlust, and at the same time finally broke the courage of the Fomorians. At that point, the Fomorian defeat was overwhelming. After the fact, Lu found and captured Bresh, saying, "Why should we trust you when you betrayed us?" Bresh responded, "Because I can teach you how to plow fields, sow crops, and reap harvests." The Tuatha De Danann respected and accepted these terms, and therefore farming and agriculture came to Ireland. With that, the Tuatha De Danann asked the Morrigan for a story. And there, among the fields of the dead, she told the story of how the world would end. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. And there we have it. That was the story of the Isle of Destiny. If you liked this video and you want more, please consider leaving a like and subscribing down below so you don't miss any new content from me. Also, if you have any other ideas you want to see in any future videos, please leave your suggestions in the comments down below. Who knows? It might just happen. Alright, well, that's all the time I have for this video, so I'll see you all next week with some brand new content for you. See you guys then.